to this. Welcome to this exciting author event with Dick Belsky. Stitch is a website created to wipe out loneliness. It's in 88 countries around the world with large numbers of members in Australia, Canada, the United States, and the United Kingdom. My name is Wendy, and I've hosted over 600 global Zoom events since December 2020 on a variety of topics. Today, we welcome Dick Belsky. R.G. Belsky is an award-winning author of crime fiction and a journalist in New York City. His newest novel, his newest mystery, Broadcast Blues, was published in January by Ocean View. It is the sixth in a series featuring Clare Carlson, the news director for a New York City TV station. The first book, Yesterday's News, was named Best Mystery of 2018 at Deadly Inc. There. The second, Below the Fold, won the Forward Indies Award for Best Mystery of 2019. The third Clare Carlson mystery, The Last Scoop, came out in 2020. The fourth book, Beyond the Headlines, came out in hardcover in 2021 and paperback in 2022. The fifth, It's News to Me, was published in hardcover in 2022 and paperback in 2023. Belsky has published soon to be 24 novels, all set in the New York City media world, where he has had a long career as a top editor at the New York Post, the New York Daily News, Star Magazine, and NBC News. I mean, how do you get better than that? He also writes thrillers under the name of Dana Perry, and he is a contributing writer for the Big Thrill magazine and Book Trib. So we so welcome you. We're so grateful you're here.
Thank you. That sounds a lot more impressive when you put it the way you read it than it maybe is, you know. Well, thank you. It's good to be here. And, you know, it's funny. I was looking at the Yesterday's News, the book behind you, which is the first in the Clare series. And, you know, people always think that there's like a great plan for all these things. And wow, you know, I had this idea to write a series about a TV news writer, and it was going to be 6 books, including the new one. And that's not really what happened. So that book there, Yesterday's News, was originally going to be a standalone and had a female character because if anybody has read or does read the book, you'll see that the character has to be a woman because it involves something in her past that affects a big story she's doing. And I just thought it was a great idea to do. And I thought it was a one-off book, and I never expected to see Clare Carlson again. But, you know, as it turned out, people, you know, my publisher was like, oh, we should do more Clare Carlson. But, you know, I think a lot of people think, you know, these things are, you know, they're really thought out. And I know with me, you know, very little is thought out. I kind of just do something and then you sort of see where it goes.
That's exciting. Well, we're so happy you're here.
Well, it's good to be here, you know, on my, I'm sitting in New York City, if anybody wants to know. And I don't know where Lori is in New Jersey, but I also spend time in New Jersey. So, you know, it's kind of all one big area around here. So, and right now it's kind of like Seattle because it's raining. So, you know, it feels like Seattle.
Yeah. So tell us about your, so Donna has a question.
I just had a question. When you're writing, and like you said, you thought this was going to be a standalone book. Have you ever kind of written yourself into a corner or a predicament, you know, where you're like, now what am I going to do with this character?
Well, yeah, no, and in the truth of the matter is that's the actual thing to some degree happened with Clare Carlson because Clare Carlson in the books is like the news director of a station. She's not like a TV reporter who goes out and covers stories. So that worked for the first book. So I made her the news director, and she gets involved because it's a story that personally involved her. But now I've got to write, you know, I've written 5 more books. And in each case, you know, a news director of a TV station it's kind of like my job when I worked at a paper. I was like the city editor. Well, I didn't go out and cover stories. I sat in an office and I dealt with people and ads and revenue and all that stuff that you do when you're in an executive role. So Claire's in an executive role. So every book, I now have to think of some reason why she's out covering the story herself. And if I had to do it all over again, I just made her a TV reporter in the first book. But as I said, I didn't really realize that when I was doing it. And so, yeah, I wrote myself into a little bit of a corner. And every time I sit down to write the book, I have to think, okay, now why is Claire out there covering it? And the one comparison I can make, and I'm drawing a blank on the name, but you remember that TV show with Rock Hudson, where he was the police commissioner, and
Yeah.
Susan St. James was his wife. And I sort of,
Rockford Files?
what was it?
What was it, Rockford Files?
No.
Oh,
But they
okay.
were, he was like the police commissioner of the town.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is he had to find reasons like why he was solving crimes. So it, my character is a little bit like that. But yeah, like I said, I mean, at one point when I was writing the book, I didn't even have her as a TV reporter. I had her as working on a website. I had, again, this went through a lot of transition before, Clare Carlson became Clare Carlson. And just to wrap up your question about about writing yourself in a corner, and this is exactly the way it happened. My book was sold to the publisher, and the publisher called me up afterward and said, we're really glad to publish your book, but we want to change the title. And my original title was Forget Me Not, which was actually a pretty good title for the book. But she said, we want to call it Yesterday's News because then it'll go along with the other books in the series. And I said, what series? I mean, I have no idea what she's talking about. And she said, well, you're planning to do more books with this character, right, as a series. And there was like a moment's hesitation. And then, I went, oh, absolutely. Yeah, sure, of course. And after I got off the phone, I called my agent and I said, do you know that they want to do a series on this? She said, no, I never heard that. And I said, they do. And that's how the series was born. So I just like to tell these stories because people think it's the world of publishing is a lot more organized, I think, sometimes than it is,
Okay,
Hear me?
Anita,
Okay, yeah.
So you hadn't planned on writing these additional books. How did you come up with a story to follow up that initial book? I mean, that's just means like such creativity. I can't
Well,
imagine.
coming up with stories for me, I have a huge advantage because I spent all these years working in the news business. So pretty much all of my books, all 24 of them are, what's known in the business is ripped from the headlines. I do, Law and Order was famous, of course, for doing that. I mean, I don't write real stories, but I take a story, like Son of Sam. I was involved in that when I was very young. And so I'll write a serial killer who's sort of like a son of Sam. I covered was involved in covering the O.J. murder trial in the 90s. And so I did a book about a celebrity who's in a big trial for murder. So coming up with story ideas, and it's kind of easy because I've wound up just by being where I am. I mean, OJ, Son of Sam, John Benet Ramsey. I mean, so many big stories that I've been involved with over the years. And most of them wind up finding their way in some form into my books. I always say, my comment about that is when people say, where do you get your ideas? It's like, well, I went to work every day in the newsroom and there are ideas everywhere. Now turning those ideas into into books, fiction books is, that requires a bit more work.
so how much do you write every day?
I'm trying to think how to answer it. I try and write something every day. And that's my advice to anybody who wants to be a writer. I don't if you were going to pin me down, I would say I try and do 1,000 words a day, which isn't a tremendous amount. The key for me is writing something every day. I mean, like I'm sitting at my desk right now. I did something else this morning because I was reading a book I wanted to read. And then just before I came on, I said, well, I'm going to write a little bit. And I wound up getting like 1,000 words out. I just think if you don't write every day, it becomes very difficult to write. And, you know, being a journalist, you know, probably like 99.9% of the people I work with always say to me, wow, I'm going to try and write a novel. I'd like to write a novel. What do I do? And my answer is, you know, sit down and write it. I mean, that's really what you have to do. So I don't have a word count or anything like that per se. But you know, I try and do something every day. And it doesn't have to be, this sounds crazy probably, but it doesn't have to be good. Because if you start worrying about how good it is, you're not probably going to do it and you're going to second guess yourself. So I try and put something down every day. And then later you go back and look at it, and sometimes you're surprised, you know, like, hey, that's not bad at all, or that really worked. But if it isn't, at least it gives you a starting point to do something. But do I write? I mean, look, there are people like, you know, Stephen King, I think, has always claimed that he writes every day of the year except Christmas and his birthday. I can't say I do that, but I try and hit that kind of a pattern. And I think this is true of a lot of writers. There's a limit to how much you can write. I find there's a limit to how much I can write in a particular day. I mean, I basically write for an hour or two. Anything after that, I think you kind of burn out your creativity. Now, there's other things you can do, like I write my books in longhand, so then I can spend another hour or two putting it on the computer or editing it or something like that. But I would say the actual writing process takes about an hour or two every day. But being regular about it is really the key. So if anybody out there wants to write a novel, that's my advice. Every day, you know, do it. And don't worry about how good it is until you're done with it. Then look back. Then you can say, oh, it's terrible. But just, you know, just keep writing.
Donna?
Yeah, can I ask another question?
Of course.
Sure.
Keep them coming.
I've got a situation that happened in my life years ago that my friends and people have always said, you got to write a book, you got to write a book. And I've thought about it, but how do you start? You know, how do you start a book? How do you get into a book? I think maybe once I got into it, I might be able to write something, but
Are we talking about a nonfiction book or a fiction book?
oh, this was definitely nonfiction.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's easier in some ways because you've got facts that you're dealing with. And if it's something that happened in your life, it's facts that you know and you don't have to do a lot of research with. I think the sitting down and starting of the book is the most important and also the hardest part. Years ago when I started to write, I mean, many years ago, and I wrote in newspapers and as a journalist, but I read a mystery. I had read a Raymond Chandler mystery, and I was like, oh, you know, I'm going to try and write something. I could write something like that, and I was all excited, and I thought, and I set aside some time, and I want to say computer, but in those days it was a typewriter, and I sat at the typewriter and I sat down, and like nothing. It was like so hard to start, and you know that idea of, like they used to say, the blank page, and now it's sort of the blank screen. Although I still tend to do stuff not on the computer. I do it later on the computer, but I actually write stuff out. I just find it more creative for me that way. But that blank page, the key is just keep looking at it and doing it and try and put something down. I just can't overemphasize how important that is. There are many days I get up in the morning and I was like, I have no idea what to write. I have no idea what kind of a chapter to do. And I just sit at it and I say, all right, well, I'm going to write one paragraph, then I'll write another paragraph. And by surprisingly enough, you'll have something. Now it's harder when you start because you got to start from the beginning. But you can't have a book without a beginning. I mean, I know it sounds obvious,
Right.
you know, that getting over that hump of actually sitting down and writing it. There's a famous story about Raymond Chandler that I always loved, where he talked about how to write like this and getting over that. And his thing was that you needed to set aside a certain period of every day, whether it be an hour or whatever, in which you're going to do nothing but write. In other words, you sit at your desk and you don't allow yourself for that hour to do anything. You don't turn on the TV, you don't turn on music, you don't cook breakfast, you don't talk to your kids, you have an hour where you have said to yourself, I am going to do nothing but sit at this desk. I'm going to do nothing but write. Now, having said that, according to the Chandler theory, you don't have to write anything. You're not required to write. You just can't do anything else. And just by the process of osmosis or whatever, you will write because you don't have anything else to do. And you sit there and you force yourself to do it. And that concept is something that I've tried to do in my writing. And I would just, you know, maybe not quite to that extent, but I would just recommend that to everybody. Just set aside an hour a day or whatever, no matter how busy you are, everybody can find like an hour and just say, this is what I'm going to do during that hour. I'm going to write. And you can't judge how good it is until, I mean, you might write the first chapter and you might show it to somebody or look at it yourself and say, you know, I don't know, this isn't any good. But you can't do that unless you write it first. And one additional thing on that, since I brought it up about showing it to somebody, be careful about taking advice from people about your writing who aren't really an agent or an editor, because they don't necessarily know. So if you have friends and stuff and they're like, oh, that's really good, or oh, that's no good, write what you feel. To me, that's the important thing. If you like what you write, that's the most important thing. It's not their book, it's your book. So these are the rules I follow. I mean, you don't have to do them, but that's kind of the way I approach writing.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh,
Sharon, do you have a question? You're muted. You'll need to unmute so we can hear you.
I've got two monitors and they're kind of conflicting. Okay, I guess I'd like to know after, I'm not writing now, but I did write a novel and kept on rewriting and rewriting. But an interesting part for me is the character traits that you decide each person has and the little additional details, like one person always says a certain phrase or they've got a certain mannerism and such. At what point do you start doing that, or do you go back afterwards and see, oh, I missed a couple?
Well, you brought up character, and to me, that's the most important thing in this,
Right.
in my books or in any book. To me, character is more important even than the story. I always say, I mean, I've read books where the story isn't that great, but I love the character, you know, and I'll just keep reading it. And if you might have a book that's a really good story, but if you're bored with the character, I mean, I to put it down. And like even some of the great mysteries, I mean, you know, even going back to Raymond Chandler, I mean, a lot of the Chandler book stories aren't that great. It's characters, so wow, so Robert B. Parker spent 40 of them and they're great. But I mean, the book stories aren't great. It's the character. So for me, the most important thing is the character. Now, in my case, I have a primary character. You know, you may have multi-characters in a book who are like not one main character. In my books, I generally have one main character. And in this case, it's Clare Carlson. And she's the most important thing in the book. I mean, I've always got to get her right. And for those, I don't know who's read the book or who hasn't, but Claire is, number one, you want to make her interesting to people. You want to make her kind of smart and funny and and you want people to you know, to be around her, to hear her. You don't want to bore people. Claire is one of these people who's like a terrific journalist. She's great at breaking stories, but her personal life, as I describe it, is like a train wreck. Everything is, you know, she's had bad romances, bad marriages. She makes decisions that aren't good all the time in her personal life because her business life, her job on TV takes so much time. Her rest of her life is a mess. And that kind of balance is really important to me because not only do you want to make the character likable, but you also want to make the character flawed. Nobody wants to read a character who's like wonderful, who does everything great, never does anything wrong. At least I don't. You're trying to get a character that people relate to and laugh about. Somebody made a reference earlier to the show, The Rockford Files. To me on TV, that's like the classic example. I mean, Jim Rockford, James Garner was like he was a good detective and he solved cases, but you know, he was this guy, everything would go wrong in his life. You know, things would break, his car would break down, he couldn't pay his bills. You know, those are the things you're trying to do in a character that's interesting and a character that your readers will want to follow. Because if they don't want to follow the character, they're not going to read the book. And then once you get past that character, then you get into all the other characters. And that can get tricky too. Because number one, you got to have bad characters. You got to have some evil. You got to have a bad guy per se. And you want to make that person right too. I mean, the bad guy can be sort of likable, or woman can be sort of likable too, until you realize what they're doing. And they need to be a good adversary for your character. They can't just be somebody who shoots people for no reason or anything like that. And then you need to surround the character with other characters. So in my books, Claire works in a newsroom, much like I worked at newsrooms all my life. And I worked around a lot of funny, crazy, interesting people. And I surround Claire with that. So it's not just Claire, but she's got an anchor team. She's got a sports guy. She's got a weather. She's got a boss. And all these people are sort of like the cast of characters. I mean, think about the Mary Tyler Moore show, for instance, WJM in the early 70s. Mary Tyler Moore was great, but one of the reasons you loved the show was Lou Grant and Ted Knight and all the other people. So that's how you build characters, I think, in a book. And pretty much every book that does really well, or any book that I've read and liked, has characters that I like. So start with the character and let go with the story after you've got the character right.
Lori from New Jersey has a question.
Hi. You asked where I lived. I live in Bergen County, up under the border of New York State, about 30 minutes outside of George Washington Bridge.
Yeah, I used to live in Bergen County a long time ago. I live down in near Princeton now, so I'm
Okay.
actually in the city too. But so I know a little. Yeah, I know. I'm looking at Westwood. I've heard of that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice. It's starting to spread out up here, and so we've got like neighborhood deer and stuff like that. It's not so urban.
Yeah, we don't get much of that in New York City, but I do see it when I'm in New Jersey. It always freaks me out. I'll see a deer on the highway and I'm like, whoa, nature.
I know, nature. I have some questions about okay, so you've got crime fiction. So you've kind of got some kind of a plot going on where you've got a certain conclusion. Do you generally, like at the beginning, write some kind of an outline or something so
No,
that you know
no,
where you're progressing towards? And
no.
no?
I'm trying to think how emphatic I can say no to you. So the question, Lori, the question you just asked is the question that, I mean, it's a great question because it's the question that comes up constantly at mystery conferences and thriller conferences and stuff. And the phrase always is, are you a plotter or a pantser? Meaning, do you plot your story out or you do it by the seat of your pants? And there's no right or wrong way to do that. I do no plotting in advance. I have an idea I start with. Sometimes I have a general idea of where the book is going to wind up, although that can frequently change as the book is doing it. And I have no idea how I'm going to get from the beginning to the end, and I just keep writing. There are other people big best-selling people who outline extensively. I interview a lot of authors for this magazine, The Big Thrill, a lot of prominent authors. And it's probably like 50-50, the people who outline and plot and the ones who don't. And there's like one big best-selling author is Jeffrey Deaver, written a lot of big thrillers. He literally writes an outline of 200 pages. I mean, it's almost like a book, but he plots out everything for like 200 pages. So when he's writing, he's just kind of, just taking that and expanding that. And again, that can work really well. And if I could do that, maybe I would, but I've never done an outline. I like to sort of see where the characters just go and where they take me. And a lot of times that will surprise me. Most of the time, the book I wind up with is not the book I necessarily thought when I started. And the characters will do things, you thought they were going to go one way and then you can take them another way. And also sometimes the characters can grow by doing it like this. So like I've had cases where I've had, a friend of Clare Carlson's who I think is going to make one appearance in the book to have some exchange with her. And then I like the character so much, I turn her into like a regular character in the book and in all the books. So I like to just see where the story goes. I like to surprise myself. And that works for me. But again, I'm the last person in the world to tell anybody else, certainly very successful people, how they do it. But then, the way around, I don't know how many people read, like Hank Felipe Ryan is a big popular novelist. And we were on a panel a while back and we were talking and she was like me. She was like, oh, I'm in the middle of a book. Like, I don't know how I'm ever going to fit. I don't know where it's going. I don't know what's going on. And that's kind of the way I operate too. So it's not clean and smooth, but it's the way I like to write it.
Do you backtrack sometimes and add little clues to,
Oh
kind of
yeah.
entice the audience?
Yeah. So I basically finished. The other thing I try and do is I try and not edit as I go. I try and and again, this is not true of every author, but I just try and get through it, like kind of race through it from to the end of the book. And then I have a manuscript, but that manuscript is not, a finished manuscript. I then have to go through, sometimes I even have chapters out of order and stuff like that. And then I have to go through, but I have something to that I can work with. And I'm sorry, what was you asked me a specific question I started to answer. What was the question? Was
Oh, do you go back and add little clues to entice the audience?
Right. So this is what I do when I'm writing the book. And it's again, it probably makes it harder for me than if I plotted it all out. I go through like the first 3/4 of the book and I throw out questions for the reader, like something that nobody understands. How did this body get here? Why did this person show up here? I raise all these questions for the 3/4 of the book. When I'm raising these questions, I don't know the answer to these questions. So in the end of the book, I then have to go back and figure out, oh, okay, well, maybe this happened or this happened. Normally I can do that. Every once in a while, I have to go back and take out the original question because I don't have an answer for it, but, and the opposite, in terms of going back would be like, say you suddenly decide you're going to have a killer come out of, left field per se, or somebody that hasn't been like the main suspect. Well, one of the things is, you always got to play fair with the readers. So you can't have somebody not in the book at all. And then at the very end say, oh, that person, did it. So if I do something like that, where I have some lesser character who turns out to be the bad guy, then I've got to go back in the book and write them in a little bit more. I've got to drop a few clues in there to let people know. So, and what you're trying to do is drop a clue that nobody sees when they're reading it. But then when they know the answer, they go, oh yeah, he said that on page, 50 to 50, that something, and oh, I should have seen that. So yes, there's a lot of that. But that happens once you've actually finished the manuscript and then you're pulling it together and editing it, which is you know, by far my least favorite part of the procedure. The writing part is fun. Going back and fixing everything is tough.
So I've noticed a lot of the best books will have some kind of a hook in the beginning
Yeah.
to, you know, to kind of capture somebody and so
Well,
that they want to read more.
you know,
Do you have little tricks for that?
no, I try and grab the reader with the first line. I mean, I'm just gonna read to you this is the opening line of Broadcast Blues, which I think works like that. The first two lines are, if you're reading this, I'm already dead. How's that for an attention grabbing opening?
Yeah.
Uh, that's what I try. I mean, you know, that's very specific, but I try and do that. Look, I'm not only a journalist, but I'm a tabloid journalist where you're supposed to put everything in the lead. You don't wait till the 12th graph or whatever to tell the story. So I try and grab in all my books with the first paragraph. I spend a lot of time on that first few paragraphs because I feel that, you know, I mean, I've had people say to me like, well, it's so-and-so book's a little slow, but once you get like 50 pages in, I'm not going to get 50 pages into a book that, I mean, I can't tell you how many times where I've like, you know, like probably many of you, especially before we bought everything on Amazon when we spent more times in bookstores, although I still do. And you would see a book, you'd look, and oh, that looks interesting. I like the headline, whatever, I like the cover, I like and you pick it up and you read the first page. And I can almost always tell from the first page if it's a book I'm going to want to read or not. If it's a book that's describing 3 paragraphs about the sunset, I'm not going to read it. You know, if it's a book that has like an opening line, I wrote a piece once on you know, the you know, some of the best opening lines in books, and there is some great one. You know, like, you know, there's a book called The Day I Died, and it starts out, the day I died started out as blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, I'm in this. Stephen King's The Poet, which is, you know, probably the best serial killer book I've ever read, and features a newspaper reporter. And the opening line is, death is my business, you know, and it goes on, there's a newspaper reporter talking. So I can't overemphasize how important that is to grab the reader with that first, not just the first page, but like the first paragraph, and get them involved in it. And like I say, if a book doesn't grab me on the first page, I'm probably not going to read it. I mean, I can't, maybe if I knew for some reason it was, you know, if it was Michael Connelly or Stephen King or somebody that I knew wrote a good book, maybe I wouldn't need that. But they don't write bad first pages. You know, they all grab you in the beginning. So it's that first chapter you write is, you know, in many ways is I don't say the most important, because then you have to finish the book, but you can't go anywhere until you've written that first chapter. So that's the starting point. And first chapters are fun because you know, you can say anything you want, because, you know, when you get later, you say, oh, I got to worry about this, or I said this earlier. I've always loved writing first chapters of books because I can set it up any way I want, because there's nothing yet else in the book except that chapter.
No constraints, right? Thank you. I appreciate that.
Anita, you had a question.
Yeah, I was wondering, well, it's 2 things. One is, please don't laugh at me, but I love murder mysteries, and I watched A Murder, She Wrote with J.B. Fletcher, who plays this writer who was always solving problems. How do you keep up with what's been done? Like, for instance, you said you have a series of 6 books, and I apologize, I've never read any of your books. I'm just interested in learning more about just authors and everybody else and how they write. How do you keep up with the characters from one point to the other? Because I know that as a reader, when I read books, if I see something in detail that wasn't in a book in a prior book, I go, wait a minute, that wasn't there before. How did this pop up from nowhere?
So,
How do you
yeah,
keep up with the characters,
well, yeah,
events that happen in their lives and everything?
that is
And
an issue. Again, you actually are breaking up your audio a little bit, but what you were asking me was like, when you're writing 6 books, how do you make sure that it's consistent? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
And the answer is you don't always. I've had at least a couple experiences with the Clare books. I had one with my last one, not this one so far, but in my last one where somebody wrote to me and they said, well, you got the name of Claire. So Claire has a granddaughter, and it says you got the name of Claire's granddaughter wrong. And I said, no, it's Emily. And like, I'm watching the cat there. And they're, yeah, but in book 2, you mentioned it and it was a different name. So it's very easy to make those kind of mistakes. Hopefully most people don't notice them. The problem is, like, every book is read by like a copy editor, and they, make sure there are no mistakes. But a copy editor reading this book isn't going to necessarily know what was in something 3 books earlier. And I did that once in another series I did, where I went to a thing, and this woman said, I love your books, but you had your character's wife's ex-husband name wrong. And I was like, no, it's this all the way through. And it was the same thing, but in a previous book in the series, I had called him something else. So there are these little hitches in a series, and you have to be. The one thing that's good about writing a series is you don't have to create the character. Like, so if I'm writing a new book, then I have to come up with a character like, okay, who is she? What's she doing? I have the character, but the problem, like you say, is that she has such a history, and it gets more difficult as you go along. Because if you've written a second book and a third book, well, you sort of remember by the 6th book. I don't even know what somebody like Michael Connelly, who's done like 40 Harry Bosch books, does, but it's a problem in all series. And I know you mentioned in passing, I think you mentioned Murder, She Wrote, which is always a funny thing to talk about in mystery circles, because it's the classic suspension of belief where there's 2,000 people in Cabot Cove and 600 of them have been murdered. But so at one point I was talking to I met the guy who was writing the books that went with the TV. There was a series of books
Oh,
with it. Yeah, best-selling books. And he ran into that trouble with Jessica Fletcher, because it turns out there are certain rules that Jessica Fletcher follows that if you break them, the readers will be upset. And one of them was Jessica Fletcher never drove a car. Now, I didn't really know it. I've seen a million Murders She Wrote on TV, but he had her somehow in a car driving, and he's like, no, you can't do that.
They do
And
that.
the other thing is, she never, as far as I know anyway, from what I've been told, is there were very strict rules, like about not just about her having a romance, but about her having any kind of physical contact with a man. It was very, like, that was not what she did. So when you're writing a series like that, yeah, you have to be aware of all that. And like I say, unfortunately, and this is great that people do, but people get into the character, they love the series, and they sometimes know more than the author. And that's happened a couple times to me. I'm sort of happy about it. I'm sort of like, wow, okay, you're really reading it, and but it's fiction, and every once in a while, it's very hard to keep everything consistent through a series of books. So
does anybody else have any more questions?
I'd just like to add one thing, if nobody does. One thing that you've alluded to in the beginning when you introduced me with that very very generous introduction is that I also write books under the name of Dana Perry.
Yeah.
And so Dana Perry is me. I've written 17 books under R.G. Belsky, or some variation of that. And I've already written 4 as Dana Perry, and I've got 3 more coming. And I just want to mention this because it's very unusual. It might be worth checking out. I have a series of 3 thrillers involving a new character. It's an FBI agent, woman FBI agent named Nikki Cassidy. And she like hunts down missing girls and serial killers of young girls and stuff. And the thing about this is normally when you write a thriller, you get the next thriller in the series a year later or something. In this case, all 3 of these books are they're being released by a British publisher called Bookerger, which is actually owned by the Shed here. And they're all being released simultaneously on April 2nd. So all 3 thrillers will come out at the same time. Now, the concept here is, basically like binge reading in the same way we binge watch something on TV now. And it hasn't really been done a lot. And it's a kind of an interesting experiment. It's not my idea, but I mean, I had to write like 1,200 pages of a thing and it's all going to go out in one big shot. But the hope is that you'll read the first book and there'll be an overriding story that is solved in that book, but then there'll be a sort of an ongoing story that will go into the second book. And it's kind of like, hopefully, like when you're watching, a series on TV, like we all have been. I just watched True Detective or whatever. That once one's over, you see episode 2, and you say, "Well, I'm not going to watch that," and then suddenly you're watching it because it automatically clicks on it. So Dana Perry, the first one's called The Nowhere Girls, and it'll be out on April 2nd under my name. And most of these books are not hardcover books; they're online and Audible, so you can get them actually, pretty cheaply online if you want to check them out. And if you read the Clare Carlson character and you like her, I think you'll probably like the Nikki Cassidy character. It's a different character completely, but she does share some of the same traits because I wrote both of them. So, it's going to have some of me in all these characters.
Let's see, Anita.
Yeah, I'm interested in when I read a book and I see different characters, female, male, different ethnicities. One of my thoughts that comes in my mind is how does for instance, a man can figure out how a woman thinks? Because I think women think differently. Sometimes we're more emotional, sometimes we're not. Sometimes
that's an
and
issue.
sometimes we're not. Somebody who's African American may have a way of speech pattern and stuff like that that may be different. How do you feel that you're true to your character when you represent them if they're not who you are? I mean, you're not a female.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, again, this goes back to my idea that everything isn't totally planned out. When I wrote my very first book many years ago, I wrote a mystery and I had a reporter and I had a male reporter. And, he was a kind of traditional male reporter. And I had a friend in publishing who read the story at the book or part of the book. And she said, well, this is pretty good. It's a good story and everything. She's like, but I don't know, it just seems like, I've read this kind of character a lot. Like, what if you made the character a woman? And at that point, this was quite a while ago. At that point, women in journalism, faced a lot more obstacles than they do now. They were much more relegated to, covering cooking and features than they were covering hard crime. It's not the case now, but it was then. And I was like, yeah, that is, because then you can have her, fighting more to get the big story and doing a lot of stuff. So I changed it into a woman and it kind of made the book just come alive for me. It's like, whoa, this is much better character. And because of that, and because I've worked with so many incredibly interesting, talented women over the years, I mean, I spent most of my life in newsrooms working with a tremendous amount of women news people. And that's who Claire is. I mean, it's not me. I mean, it may be a little bit of me, but mainly it's like I'm putting together a combination of a lot of the cool women that I've worked with over the years, and I've sort of created them as Claire. It is something I'm always careful about. I'm happy to say that virtually, I think more women have said good things to me about it than men about the character. I've had pretty much unanimously women saying to me, you write a woman so well, not like you don't know how to write a woman. If they said you don't know how, I would be concerned and I would maybe not do it. But that's never really been an issue. I have and again, this is something I'm aware of all the time. I have a woman agent, and I have a woman editor who's the main editor on all the books, and I always listen to them. So there have been occasions, and not like a huge thing, but where they'll say to me something like, I don't think a woman would react quite like that. I don't think she would say that. And because not just because they're women, but because they're women that I know are very good, I always listen to them. You know what I mean? I don't, it doesn't happen a lot, but whenever that happens, I'm like, okay. In the same way with like the way a woman dresses, I'll say to a woman, like, does that make sense that she looks like this? Cause I'm not, cause I just want to make it all seem natural. The trickiest moment, in terms of a woman's issue for me was 2 books ago. I wrote a book called Beyond the Headlines, Beyond the Headlines. And it was during the time of Me Too. And, there's a lot of discussion about, women in the newsrooms and issues with men and all that. And whether women should be believed when they said that, they had been sexually harassed. And the book is about that, about a woman who is claiming all sorts of harassment. And my character, Claire, basically goes to bat for her and fights for her. But then during the battle begins to have doubts about her and begins to question whether or not she's telling the truth or not. So, as a man, that was something I wanted to be very careful about writing. And I think I was able to pull it off. And again, the women that have read the book were like, oh, no, you nailed it. But the answer is yes. As a man, it's something I have to think about. But I've written, out of the 24 books, because I went back and counted them one day, 17 feature women and 7 feature men. And that, again, is not a plan. It's just when I'm writing a book, I'm trying to find the best character. And I feel like I tend to write women characters well, and that they're easier to write in some ways because, when you're writing a man character, there's been a million men. And so me writing a woman. And then the final part of that is that so I write the character in the first person. And people were like, well, why do you write her as the first person when you're a man? And that's because I've never been successful writing in the third person. All of my books, every published book is like through the eyes of the narrator. I've done a few third person books, but they've never sold. So there may be maybe a lesson there as to why. But I like writing in the first person. I like reading in the first person. I always feel it's a much stronger voice.
Lori, you have a question.
Yes, you mentioned that you don't just always write under your given name, that you have another name that you use. Can you talk about the pros and cons of using your real name versus?
They're all pretty cons. It's a long story. So as a journalist, I'm known as Dick Belsky. If you Google me, it's like the New York Post or the New York Daily News, whatever, you'll find me as Dick Belsky. So I've always used the name Dick. When I started at one point back in the 90s, I did a female character, and the publisher wanted to use initials because they wanted to make it, I guess, not make it clear. This was before social media really and stuff. And it, it wasn't like everybody knew who everybody was. And I think they wanted to sort of make it more like, well, RG could be a woman or could be a man. Unfortunately, the plan failed because they put my picture on the book. So, so, there you go. Great plan. But anyway, I became RG Belsky for those books. Then when I sold another series back about 10 years ago, after a few years in which I hadn't really published any books because I was working so hard in the media business, I said to the publisher, I said, well, I've done books under Dick Belsky, I've done books under Richard Belsky, and I've done these books under R.G. Belsky. I'd like to just go back to my normal name, if that's okay. And they came back to me and they said, no, we like R.G. Belsky better. So, like I said, this stuff just happens and they want to publish the book. So you do what they say. So, it's not like I go around and call myself RG, and like, oh yeah, call me RG. I mean, everybody knows me as Dick or Richard or whatever. And then the Dana Perry thing, that came from the publisher too. And, there's a lot of reasons for that. One of which is, Dana Perry's one of those names, which is, it could be a man or woman. I mean, I never in a million years, you don't want to pretend, that you're a woman. I mean, there's a picture of me and I'm very open in saying R.G. Belsky is writing as Dana Perry, but there are different kind of books. And so it can get a bit confusing. People get an R.G. Belsky book and they're going to expect it to be, like a Clare Carlson book. And the books I write as Dana Perry, they're different. They're much more thrillers. They're much more driven by story and people dying and being killed and kidnapped and everything, where the Carlson books are much more character driven. So the publisher wanted to do that name, and whatever you think of the name, I should tell you that I had no part in it. I gave them a couple names that I could use, and they came back and they said, no, we like Dana Perry. So I became Dana Perry. So as you can tell, most of my names have come about because the publishers are like, well, we're going to publish your book. We're going to put what name we want on it, and which is fine. So that's the answer to all that. But it does get confusing, and like sometimes people will go back and look for another book of mine, and I have to explain to them the difference between Dana Perry and R.G. Belsky and all that kind of stuff. Now, most of my stuff, like on my website and stuff, I'm pretty clear who I am. I'm R.G. Belsky, but I also write books under the pen name of Dana Perry. And I'm not the only person in the world that's ever done that. But it would be easier if I had one name, but I don't.
Thank
Anita,
you.
Of those characters you've written, is there one that you like the most because
Yeah.
they became coalesced together? And what about that particular character that makes you
Yeah.
just
Well, there are two answers to this, I think. My one answer is, which a lot of authors will say, is my favorite book is the one I'm working on now because you're invested in it, But if I had to be completely honest, I wrote a book called it came out in 1997. It was called Loverboy. And Loverboy was the name of a serial killer who was plaguing New York very much like Son of Sam. And this was the first, I had written several smaller mysteries. This was the first kind of big thriller I had written. And it was very much inspired by like my covering Son of Sam, like that kind of a serial killer. And it involved a serial killer who had killed a bunch of people, then disappeared, and then suddenly the murders start again. And my reporter is trying to find out what's going on. And the character was a woman named Lucy Shannon, who I loved, and I've never written her as another character since, although I've tried a couple times. And she's somewhat like the Claire character, but she was like a newspaper woman reporter. And anyway, it's called Loverboy. It's about a serial killer and a newspaper woman who's battling a drinking problem and trying to solve this big case and has all sorts of secrets. And she's an unreliable narrator, assume you all know, which I love, where the character is not telling you everything until the end of the book about her own secrets. And I think to some degree, and that actually got me like a very important agent at the time. So that probably, of all the books I did, is probably the one I think might have been the best. But I like all the books. I like all the books I do. I don't have a book where I don't like. I mean, I wouldn't write the book if I didn't care about it and I didn't like it. So there are no books that I've written that I'm ashamed of or that I wouldn't want someone to read. But I think so. It's sort of a two. Right now my favorite is Broadcast Blues because I've just written it. but going back, this book called Loverboy might have been, it's still about it. It actually, if anybody wants to go back and look, it came out in '97, and a few years ago, HarperCollins put it out in paperback again, and online, because in those days there was no online in those days. So they came back a couple years ago and put it out both online and in paperback. It's very cheap, wherever it is. So it's around. With 24 books, if you ever have a lot of time to kill, you can go back and read all 24 of my books. So you got plenty to choose from if you so want to. And just remember, if it takes a lot of time to read them, just imagine how much effort it took me to write them, huh?
And they're all great. We're so happy that you came. Was there any other questions that are important to you to get answered?
I've got one more question.
Okay, Laura.
If you write about crime, mostly, does it sometimes really get you down? I mean, some of these people are really evil. Do you keep yourself kind of separated from it to try to be objective, or how do you not let it overwhelm you with it being down?
You have to remember that I spent most of my life covering real crime. And that could bring you down at times, like Son of Sam or OJ or something like that. And a lot of that stuff, people are like, oh, it's almost like it's fun, but it isn't. Like OJ Simpson case. When you read about like what happened to Nicole and the way she was brutally cut up, it's horrible, and you're covering murder all the time. When you're a journalist, especially you're a journalist like I was, which working at the New York Post, the New York Daily News, and this is real life crime, and that you kind of got to just shut yourself down and just cover it as a crime. And I look, as a reporter, I don't want to say I did horrible things, but I had to go through horrible experiences. I've had to interview parents who just lost their child to a crime. I have husbands who've just lost their wives. Part of the thing which you have to do as a journalist is you have to, most times when you're covering people, you're not covering them because they've won the lottery or something happy. It's because of something bad happened in their lives. So to answer your question, when you're writing a novel, that's not hard at all because it's all fiction. I'm just making this stuff up. So it's actually much less depressing than my real job was all those years of working as a journalist.
Thank you for that reflection.
And speaking of Son of Sam, I'll just add one little other plug, and I don't know when this will come out, but there's a series on Netflix called Sons of Sam, which is all about the son. It's a 4-episode miniseries. It came out about a year or two ago, but it's still around. And I'm in it because I'm interviewed about all the Son of Sam stuff in it, and they're doing another one, which I'm going to be shooting some scenes for here in New York probably next month. And in doing so, it requires me to go back and read about all the Son of Sam shootings, and that's depressing. Because that's real life. That's not me making stuff up. Nobody really dies in my books. It's all fiction.
Did you have a question, Sharon?
I'm just wondering, is your whole book in first person singular?
Yes.
You never do omniscient. You never jump into somebody else's head. Okay.
All through the eyes of, everything is through the eyes of Clare Carlson. Yeah, you're in Clare Carlson's head through the whole book. Yeah.
And it's past tense or present tense?
I've never really written a book in present tense. I know
Right,
some
right.
people do, but
I know I don't like it myself either. Just
uh,
wondering.
it's past. I mean, I don't have anything. I'm reading. I just read a book in present tense that was pretty good, but no, it's very straightforward. All my books, pretty much are written through the eyes of the narrator, and
Right, right.
advantages and disadvantages of that. One of the things is to some degree you need to hide some secrets. So like my character isn't necessarily telling you everything at the beginning of the book. And I sometimes will do in my books what is known as the unreliable narrator, which I kind of like in a book. I mean, the most
Sure.
again most famous is Gone Girl, where everybody is lying in the book. They're not telling you everything. And then you find out stuff as you go along. But you sort of got to play fair with the reader. But in answer to your question, yes, first person, traditional, past tense.
Donna, you had a question, right?
Yeah, I've got to ask this. About 30 years ago, did you have anything come across your news stories about a teacher that was poisoned by her husband with rat poison?
Uh, it doesn't jump out at me. I mean,
Okay.
where did it happen?
Well, I was the teacher that was poisoned.
Oh my gosh, wow.
Oh,
And that was the story I was kind of wanting to write. And I was just wondering because I mean, I knew it hit New York because David Letterman made a joke about it. So
Wow. Wow, that's
I
not
was just curious.
funny. Yeah. Where were you when this happened?
This was in St. Louis, Missouri.
Yeah, yeah. No, I don't. I mean, listen, there's so many horrible crimes,
Oh
but
yeah,
so did your
I
husband go to jail or what happened?
yeah, he's in prison. He's
Wow,
in prison.
wow. And so you were okay? I mean, you didn't.
Well, no, I ended up paralyzed from the nose down in
Oh
an
my,
event, but I've still got problems, but I'm upright and breathing. So, and I'm not trying to make this about me. I was
no,
just really
that's a
curious.
fascinating. I had no idea. I mean, I'm only, I had
Yeah,
no idea.
I was
That's
just
a
really
fascinating
curious.
story. That's a fascinating story. You should try and figure out probably
Yeah.
way to
Well,
write
and
that.
then he got to prison and tried to hire a hitman to finish the job on me and kill the prosecuting attorney.
Wow.
So, and he was a counselor at the high school down here.
Well, I think that's a good story on two levels, Donna. One of which is just the horrendous thing,
Yeah,
describing it. But I mean, I think the story that would make it a good book, if you could write it, would be how you survived it, because people
yeah,
love books like that. I mean, here you're whatever, almost killed, you're by this
yeah,
a man you thought loved you, all that.
right.
And now 30 years later, you've come back and you've had a life and he's in prison. I mean, that's a really good story, I mean, it could be a novel, but if it's your real life, you could write it either way. So
Yeah.
I would encourage you to try and do that. It's a hell of a story.
Okay. I had to bring it up. I'm sorry, Wendy.
Yeah, no, again, there's so many crimes and I don't remember particularly, and certainly if it happened in St. Louis, I wouldn't have been as,
Yeah, I just didn't know if it made it across
it
your
may have,
airwaves.
again, you're talking about years and years of crimes and that,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it isn't like, oh, you're the one, but that, I want to say impressive, not impressive. It's a pretty shocking story, but it would take but the fact that you're here and you're alive and you're good, that really makes it a story.
Well, I've made medical books because I'm the only one that's had 9 times the fatal dose and lived to talk about it. So
Yeah, but those kind of books where people survive, whether it be horrendous, problems like drugs or crime or prison, when people survive terrible things, those kind of books can be very, very popular with people. It seems like people want to read that. And I would think, I mean, yeah, and especially as a woman And I think, you know, all you gotta do is write it, Donna. That's
Yeah,
all you gotta
yeah.
do, you know? It's a good idea, just write it, you know?
Well, and I've been on TV shows and I don't do pity parties. I've always wanted to do inspiration, like, yeah, it happened, but look where I'm at, and
Yeah. well,
try
you should
to
write
help
it.
people.
If you can't, if you don't, because I have no idea what, obviously what your writing ability is. I don't know anything about it. But if you feel that you're not a good writer or you can't write it, I mean, it's something you could hire somebody to write,
Yeah.
in your words kind of thing, or work with you on it.
Yeah.
But that's a hell of a story. And I would, I could see it could be a TV movie,
It was supposed to be for Lifetime and then they changed managers or something and they dumped it.
Believe me, I've been there. I've been there. Yeah.
Mhm.
But you should keep at it.
Yeah, well, thank you. This has been very interesting.
Thank you. Interesting for me too.
Well, thank you so very much for coming. We can't thank you enough. You're inspirational to everyone, and we admire you, and we can't thank you enough. And I hope you'll come again.
Anytime, anytime, you know how to reach me again. A
Sure.
lot of times I know websites and stuff. And with you, I got a note and said, I didn't know
Yeah.
your name, and half the time I don't look at something by somebody, like, who is this person? And then I checked you out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And said, well, you don't seem like you're trying to sell me something online.
No.
And so you know how to reach me, and we've been in contact. Yeah, happy anytime. And yeah, and keep my book cover facing out there, like with
Yes, here we go. All your books are great.
Listen, I know some of you haven't read it, but this is the new one, but you can read any of them. You can read the first one. I hope if you haven't, that I've inspired you enough to at least, check out Claire, because hopefully if you read one, you'll want to read more. So
Yeah.
Definitely.
Dana Perry next month. There you go.
Thank you so very much for
Thank you.
coming.
So,